I'll just see how this goes. I haven't given a speech exactly on this. I know I was going to talk about reviewing, and I'll get to that as I go along. But I think in some ways, what we talked about yesterday and what we've done at Open Letter and 3% are very complementary in the sense that we're almost a case study for what a lot of people have been talking about, just in a very small, very strange sort of way. So in case you don't know, Open Letter Books started 4 years ago at the University of Rochester as a press that was only going to do literature and translation. So we published 10 books a year, and we knew this from the start, and that we were going to do very high quality literature, which is, as Martin alluded to, something that Americans hate, or the perception is that Americans hate this. No one does books in translation. The commonly cited figure, which we've also very popularized, is 3%. That 3% of all the books published in America are works that have been translated. And if you look at fiction and poetry specifically, not even and serious nonfiction, it's a very small number, like hundreds of books, and that's it. Like, it's tiny. So we knew immediately that we had a certain number of difficulties that were facing us. We're doing something that there's an audience for, maybe, and I'll get to that in a second, too, but there's not like a huge audience. We can't be the perception was we couldn't be very successful with this. So one of the things that we and that we were doing books that don't necessarily, like, to use your phrase, Richard, inform or entertain. We were doing books that are sort of challenging in a sense, and that we're intentionally being selected and published to be challenging for a very specific reason, that we felt like these were the books that would help culture, that would insert and help change things, or help give people a different perspective, and would add to that. And I'll talk more about that in a second too. But when we started, we took the theory, which you articulated very well yesterday too, of being very closely aligned with our customers. I knew that publishing for years has had a lot of problems because publishers hate to deal with their readers. And just to give one quick anecdote, when I was at a conference on translation in Salzburg, there was what's his name? The guy that runs Hanser Verlag, Michel Kruger, was there. Yes, and we had a panel on digital things, on digital publishing, and he was just irritable about the whole bit. He's like, I hate digital things. You're ruining my newspapers. I can't sign. They don't read a newspaper anymore. It's all online. I hate it. And I brought up the point that, like, digital doesn't just mean publishing as an object, but that it's a way to reach readers and to connect and market things and be in touch with people. So why would I ever want to talk to those people? I don't want anything to do with them. So it was like very clear publishers don't want to be connected. So we wanted to go in the opposite direction. We know we have a small audience. We have to be next to them. So we did a number of things very specifically. We wanted to brand ourselves. So we have all of our covers are very similar. They have a sort of open letter look to them. They're all within like a very, not small, but like a limited aesthetic range. They're of a certain nature, so you know what you're getting with open letter books. We started a subscription model, which I'm going to talk about for a second, where people can subscribe and get all 10 books for the year for $100, or 6 of them for $60, or 5 of them for $60. And we made that like one of our main components. We also had 3%, which is the website that alluded to, that was a complement to the press, in the sense that it was a blog about international literature and the business of publishing and books that weren't being translated and all these issues, and had a review site along with it, and has like probably like 50-fold more readers of that than any of our particular titles, which is sort of a problem because it is free and easy and everyone's interested in it. And we added on things to that, such as translation database, and most recently a Best Translated Book Award, which has grown in size. I'll talk about that more in a second anyways, as well. Now, one of the problems like that we did face, and that does tie into what we've been talking about too, is the knowledge that booksellers are going away. And when I worked at Delkey Archive Press prior to this, booksellers were a key component to being able to reach an audience. So there'd be those 50 booksellers throughout America who were really key, important, interested readers and would help promote our books. And in some ways we wanted to imitate that model with Open Letter, that we'd be able to connect with these readers, but they're vanishing. They're just going away. There's not going to be a lot of independent stores. There's a few that are going to stay around in New York and in San Francisco that are curatorial and interesting and great. But for most readers throughout the country, there's not an independent store. There's a Barnes & Noble where no one cares. Those people don't read books or recommend books, and all of the whole hand selling has sort of like evaporated. So you see that as a big problem. And one of the things that, so that was one of the reasons that we started like the subscription model. Now, in a sense, if I can back up, I've got a lot of notes that are kind of all over, so this all kind of connects in my mind, but my mind is a very weird web of ideas. So in a way, we knew that we would have that problem. We thought that we could utilize the internet and our ability to do things to be able to reach readers directly, hence the subscription series and everything else. And one of the big lures all along was ebooks would solve a lot of our problems, because we suddenly would be able to market directly to individuals who could buy a book there. So like if there's someone that wants to read an open letter book in Boise, Idaho, they order it from Amazon, they order it from us, or in theory they could download the ebook at some point in time. Otherwise they're not going to have access. But the big problem for us became thinking about how to reach these people. Like, how do you get them to know about stuff? Because there's an easy way, like we talk about word of mouth, we talk about these things. We're frequently talking about books that are essentially somewhat popular. Our books are not popular, and they're not going to be popular. And this isn't like necessarily to be a negative naysayer, but they tend to be pattern breaking. And there's two other obsessions that I have aside from like publishing and literature are the neuroscience in some degree and behavioral economics, but the psychology aspect of that. So I started thinking a lot and talking a lot recently to people about how readers actually find books, and not like readers in the aggregate, but like individual people. Like when you talk about the reader as one person. So since I work at a university, I can interview a lot of students and ask them a lot of questions. And you think that these are like the literary people that would be reading our sorts of books, so on and so forth. And there's a few things I've figured out. One is that they tend to not buy books at all. Like they buy like 10 to 20 books maximum in a year, and that's much higher than the average American. So we're talking about a very small, limited number. They also claim to never read reviews, don't read websites, could care less if anyone tweets about anything, and people they have thousands of friends on Facebook and talk about how like they buy their books because of people recommending them. However, all of them insist that they never bought a book because they just saw someone recommend it on Facebook, that they only listen to like 2 or 3 of their friends, they're very specific, and that those are the people who influence them. So thinking about this more, there's a book by Jonah Lehrer, who's a very interesting writer and neuroscientist, and he's written 2 books, one called How We Decide, that's sort of behavioral economics from a more brain angle, and one called Proust as a Neuroscientist, which is about interplay between art and science. And in Proust as a Neuroscientist, there's a section on music, and on how we listen to music and why we appreciate music, and how certain things sound cacophonous or don't sound cacophonous, and how this changes over time. And part of the reason that how that works is there's a part of your brain that when you hear music, it's trying to predict the pattern. So it tries to figure out what's coming next. And when it's right, it gives you like a reward, like a dopamine sort of reward. So you feel like you're right, this is good, and it's very self-reinforcing. So when you hear a song that you know and that you've heard before in the past, it tingles you, it makes you feel good. So when you hear something that's completely different in some way, that's a huge problem because it doesn't sound right. You can't predict the pattern, it sounds bad. And you have to sort of become accustomed to that to then understand that pattern and to appreciate it. Now, way extrapolating from like the brain and music to like society and readership, I do think that there is something to the fact that that readers tend to like this sort of repetition. Like we like things that we understand. We like, this is why publishers chase after the next Girl with the Dragon Tattoo or Dan Brown or whatever, is we want to find the next thing that sort of fits that pattern. Because sitcoms on American TV are all the same. Once something like sort of changes the mold slightly, everything's an imitation thereafter because it feels comfortable. Now when we're doing European fiction or like international literature or literature in general, that's of a more serious nature, one of the reasons that it tends to be more serious, and this goes for nonfiction as well, is that it's sort of challenging certain ideas or perceptions or patterns. So it's automatically like, this is where I say like it's going to be not that popular, and it's not necessarily that that's a bad thing, but over the long term it very well could be very influential and very popular. But in a short term business-minded sales way, it doesn't quite fit because it doesn't fit people's patterns. And like so one of the main obsessions become, how do you get someone, when people like read 4 books a year, buy 10 books a year, and they're obsessed with their patterns, how do you get them to buy something or even hear about something, discover something that's outside of that?